I'm Peter Hencart, and I want to show you some interesting wildlife near my home in Annapolis, Maryland. I live up the Severn River a couple of miles from downtown Annapolis on a tidal tributary called Saltworks Creek. I enjoy kayaking on Saltworks Creek, and I love to poke up into the marshy areas at the headwaters of nearby tidal creeks. Here's a photo I took from the kayak paddling down towards the end of Saltworks Creek, and you can see the headwaters marsh in the background behind that osprey platform. Here you see a shot taken while I'm entering the marsh. You can see the first 100 feet or so is a low marsh where there's no trees. In this April photo, you can see vegetation like skunk cabbage is starting to come up. Now I'm entering the slightly higher section of the marsh with its scattered trees and shrubs along the tidal creek as I'm pushing further up. Those images you just saw were from the spring, but here are some kayaking camera shots taken some weeks later during the course of the summer. The vegetation along the banks of this tidal creek has been growing dramatically, and we're seeing some spectacular flowering and glimpses into the summer bird, insect, and animal life here. We hear frogs croaking and birds chirping while we're paddling upstream towards the beaver dam. These kayaking camera shots show you some of this, but I can only say that this tidal Saltworks marsh shoreline is a dramatic contrast to the thick, invasive Phragmites that dominates much of Saltworks Creek and indeed most Severn shorelines. A bit further up, you have to push past some vines and shrubs along the banks of this richly vegetated marsh. But after a few minutes, you come to this, a stick-covered beaver dam, overgrown with jewelweed in the summer. Beyond the dam, you can see into a beaver pond about a foot higher than the tidal stream I kayaked up in. That image you just saw was the first time I actually found the beaver dam. But when I returned a few weeks later in the fall, the tide was much lower and the kayak ran aground before the dam. So I walked up in the marsh along the creek and I shot this photo, which shows that the dam is actually about 4 feet tall here. Now looking at the pond, you can see it's over 100 feet long with all kinds of trees, shrubs, and grassy vegetation along its edges. Here's my buddy Matt Korbelik kayaking up in the pond in December after the vegetation has died off. From the pond side, you can see that the dam is basically made of mud, reinforced by a meshwork of sticks. This is the classic beaver approach to dam construction. It's also clear that the dam is leaky, with some flow over the top into the marsh that we kayak up through. These puddles form a network of streams that keep the marsh wet and foster its lush vegetation. This winter drone photo gives you a view of the curving 200-foot-long beaver dam creating the pond. I've marked the east and west ends of the dam here. Above it, you see the marsh and the end of tidal Saltworks Creek. Our kayak route to the dam is shown in red. The network of small streams throughout the marsh shows up nicely on this day with light snow cover. We've learned a lot from Matt's dozens of drone photos over the course of a year. Here's another winter drone photo from right over the beaver pond. The water looks white in this photo because it's a cloudy day and those white clouds are reflected from the water surface. You can see that dark, muddy face of the dam running from the east end at the lower right to the west end at the upper middle. The freshwater input stream called Cabin Branch is at the upper left, and you can see the 100-foot scale bar in the lower left. Kayaking up the pond from the tidal stream gets us to the east end of the dam in the lower right. This drone shot from above was taken on a sunny winter morning, and you can see those big tree shadows, but the pond now looks mostly greenish with light brown shallow areas shown by the sediment deposited from Cabin Branch. So if this is a beaver pond, where's the beaver lodge? The left illustration shows the classic pond lodge created by beavers in the middle of the pond, where they scooped up bottom mud, fortified it with sticks, and created a cave above the water level with underwater entrances. We see no such lodge in this pond. What we do have is what's called a bank lodge, which is illustrated on the right. The steep eastern bank limiting this pond has a bank lodge in it, dug by the beavers, and an above-water cave where their lodge functions actually take place. The roof of that lodge is fortified by sticks, but that doesn't show up well in these drone photos. Here's a spring drone photo zoomed in on the eastern edge of the pond, and you can just see the light brown bank lodge along the shore. Nearby is what's called a beaver larder, a pile of sticks planted into the mud by the beavers for their winter food. Here's a photo from the kayak of that bank lodge with the nearby larder on the left. Those sticks on the roof of that lodge protect it from predators that can dig. Our winter photos don't show the lush summer vegetation that's the key to the beaver's success in restoring the rich wildlife habitat. Here's a photo looking at the pond from the kayak access point down towards the cabin branch, and you can see all that dense vegetation along the banks and in the shallow part of the pond. And here's a shot I took in the middle of the pond looking back at the eastern edge of the dam. That mud you could see in the winter is now completely covered in vegetation. At the left, you see the tall wild rice with its yellow tassels growing up in the marsh a little ways back from. Here I am in August, paddling south alongside the dam before it turns to the right into that side valley. Now I'm further along, frogs still croaking, and I'm still headed south towards the cabin branch entrance. The grassy vegetation in the pond is getting denser. Now I'm in the middle of the pond, swinging around towards the east and then back up towards the beaver lodge. All that grassy vegetation continues in the shallower portions of the pond. The wild rice is really thick at the southern end of the pond. Although beavers are well known for eating the cambium layer of tree bark, in fact, when it's available, beavers prefer grassy marsh plants like this. In the dozens of trips I've made to the beaver dam and the pond, I've never seen a beaver. So where are they? Reading up on beavers, it seemed like they were most active at night, and so I installed this motion-activated wildlife camera pointed at the beaver dam right where we can kayak up to it. Here you see a daylight capture of a beaver climbing up from the tidal creek into the pond. Beavers have created a mud-covered track on the dam for going up and down, which this beaver is using. That camera has been in place for over a year now, and it captures beavers on the dam throughout the year, including winter, when there's even a bit of ice on the pond. Sometimes we get 2 or even 3 beavers going up or down the dam together. But our beavers are mainly active at night, and our camera uses infrared lighting for most beaver photos and videos. Over 95% of the beaver captures from this camera have come at night. About half the time, beavers going up from the tidal creek into the pond are carrying some kind of vegetation. Sometimes it's cattails or reeds like you see here. And sometimes it's woody sticks, typically maybe about 1 inch in diameter. But sometimes we see bigger sticks, the sort of thing we see reinforcing the mud dam in these pictures. Occasionally we see beavers swimming in the pond near the dam, but here it's not clear whether they're scooping mud up onto the dam. What's really impressive is the level of beaver activity captured by the camera. In this graph, I plotted the number of beaver photos per night across the course of the first 8 months of the camera operation. You can see a huge burst of activity at the beginning of November, falling off as we get through December into January. But throughout the winter, we're getting an average of 4 or 5 beaver photos per night. In the spring, activity picks up again until about May, when it dramatically diminishes, and throughout the summer there's less than one beaver photo per night. You can't identify individual beavers from these photos, so I can't tell whether there are multiple beavers captured on active nights, but sometimes we get both big ones and small ones. On less active nights, it's quite possible it's a single beaver going up and down multiple times. Now we're looking at a totally unanticipated beaver activity. While kayaking up to the dam in the middle of March, I had noticed some sticks at the bottom of the creek about halfway up to the dam. But the next time I went up, I got what you see here. It looks like the woody stick network that reinforces the beaver dams, with no sign of mud blocking water flow. So a week later, I installed another wildlife camera looking down at this part of the creek. I took this photo at high tide where water is flowing easily both ways in this part of the creek, and you can see some of those sticks are starting to float. This winter drone shot shows the location of the 2024 new dam with the camera next to it. We call this camera the new dam cam. A week after installation, that camera shows a beaver adding to the stick meshwork at low tide. And we see this again the next day. I suspect this is young beavers trying out their dam building skills. They do not look as big as some of the beavers we see at the big dam. Here's a high tide shot showing a beaver headed back to the big dam with no attempt at reinforcing the dam here. In May, wood ducks were swimming up here at high tide with no evidence of a dam. A week later, here's a big beaver entering the creek here and then swimming right back up to the big dam underwater. It's clear that this construction didn't work to enhance water buildup for a pond, which is the whole reason beavers build dams. After it was clear that the beavers had abandoned this dam, I moved that camera downstream to a place where it would capture beavers entering and leaving the marsh from Saltworks Creek. A previous wildlife camera at this marsh cam location had shown beavers entering the marsh from Saltworks Creek. Throughout the spring and summer, the marsh cam showed beavers swimming up and down the creek here, often carrying vegetation up towards the big dam. These beaver captures came sporadically, such as this burst in June, but then only a few until the fall. Here in October, that marsh cam captured a beaver in the lower marsh, sampling the wilted marsh vegetation over on the other side of the creek. In the summer, the dam cam and the marsh cam captured very few beaver images, and that led me to wonder if the beavers had abandoned their big dam and pond. I decided to install a new camera pointed at the pond surface near the Bank Lodge entrance. Its location was shown by this winter drone photo when the pond was iced over and regular beaver swimming had kept ice from forming between the lodge and the larder. Here's that camera mounted on a green stake in the middle of August with the sticks of the Bank Lodge behind it. The pond cam immediately began returning images of beaver activity, like this night video of a beaver swimming along the shoreline along with lots of tiny fish or maybe tadpoles at the surface. But most images show beavers transporting wild rice and other grasses, swimming on the surface up to the camera location, where they then dive down, just as expected as if they're entering the Bank Lodge's underwater entrance. And once even followed by a young snapping turtle. Most images of beavers approaching the lodge came at night, but overall these captures were sporadic. Days went by with no captures at all, and then I'd get 5 or 6 a night over the course of the next 4 months. Beaver lodges are said to have multiple entrances, and it may be that my new camera placement was only capturing some of their activity here. Here's a shot where the beaver might have been thinking about another lodge entrance. Given the minimal beaver activity captured by our cameras in the summer, we wondered if the beavers had begun constructing a new dam upstream in Cabin Branch. We saw that their new dam construction in our tidal access creek was a failure, but above the pond there's more than half a mile where Cabin Branch runs up valley where beavers could conceivably build another dam. So Matt Korbalek and I walked about a quarter-mile section of Cabin Branch just upstream of the pond. Here's Matt standing in a nice upstream meadow with Cabin Branch beside him. It was clear from that survey hike that there was no new dam building activity up here. Near the pond, we did find this one tree recently chewed down by beavers, and that was the only evidence that beavers had come up into this area. Although this tree was in an uninhabited floodplain area of Cabin Branch, tree cutting by beavers is a classic example of a beaver-human conflict which has been going on for many years. We do have a history of beavers chewing down trees along the tidal shorelines of Saltworks Creek, and this graphic shows some of that history. At the end of Saltworks Creek, there's a valley going off to the north, which we call the Southwest Gully. It has over a dozen sizable beaver-chewed trees, some of them for sure recent. Further along the southwest shoreline, we see again a couple of fair-sized trees the beavers have cut, one recently for sure again. Then across the creek, there's an area used as a Boy Scout campground. It had a history of beaver chewing, but most of its trees have been protected by wire mesh fencing around the tree base. I recently found one small tree cut from that area as well. But the major tree cutting by beavers in recent years was in 2023, when the Safer Community Marina had a dozen smaller trees chewed down and another dozen or so larger ones chewed but not felled. These trees were subsequently protected with chicken wire, which has prevented further damage. This graphic also shows some historic beaver-damaged trees indicated by those colored arrows. One example is in my yard, shown by Google's home designation. But the three pink arrows point to small trees felled in neighboring yards in 2023 and 2024. Here you see trees that were chewed by beavers and then protected with wire mesh. The Beaver Institute says that wrapping tree trunks with a 2x4-inch wire mesh is 100% effective protection against beaver damage. We intend to protect vulnerable trees along the Saltworks Creek shorelines by working with property owners to provide this kind of protection to vulnerable trees. Over the last 15 minutes or so, I've shown you most of what I've learned about the beavers living near my home in Annapolis. I've been really impressed by our wildlife cameras, like the one I'm holding here, and I didn't anticipate how much other wildlife these cameras would capture during the 15 months or so that they've been active. I'd like to show you some of that non-beaver wildlife found by these three cameras at the beaver dam, the pond, and the marsh. The most common visitors to our beaver area were foxes. The dam cam captured an average of at least one fox visit per night throughout the year. Most of the videos like this one showed foxes using the dam as a sort of bridge to cross over from one side of the valley to the other. Occasional daytime fox photos showed these were red foxes, the most common fox in our area. They were sometimes seen carrying prey, like the one on the left with a squirrel. Here's an interesting photo of a beaver going down the dam being watched by a fox who's keeping his distance. Beavers outweigh those foxes, and they have famously sharp teeth. No question that foxes could outrun a beaver on land, but beavers spend most of their life in the water, where foxes are not going to get them. In April, when the new dam hadn't yet been abandoned, foxes sometimes used it as a bridge. But our foxes swim across the creek as well, as shown by this marsh cam capture in June. That marsh cam also showed foxes regularly patrolling the shoreline at night. Captures like this one came several times a week. One dam cam fox capture that I'm particularly interested in is shown here. It's a gray fox, not the more common red fox. I've zoomed in on this one, but gray foxes are the same size as the red foxes, but have more gray color to their coat and a black tail, especially at the tip. The most surprising video captures I've gotten have been several of coyotes visiting the dam and the marsh. These came in October and November, and I first wondered if maybe these were just big foxes, but when I showed these images to my brother who lives in California, where coyotes visit his yard regularly, he had no doubt that these were coyotes. A couple of weeks later, here's a coyote, maybe the same one, transiting the dam at 4:30 in the morning. Later that morning, we got this capture. Quite likely the same coyote again, but for this daytime shot, he turned to show his face. In between those two coyote visits to the dam, our marsh cam captured this coyote along the shoreline. It's a more distant shot, but this guy is considerably larger than foxes regularly captured by the same camera in the same place. Raccoons were also common visitors to our beaver area, again mostly at night. Here's one transiting the dam, but two others are seen by their eye shine along the edge of the pond in the background. Here's a raccoon using that new dam as a bridge in July at low tide. In May, the marsh cam shows this raccoon swimming across the creek when no bridge was available. At low tide, we see a raccoon here digging in the soft mud for brackish water clams. It's been no surprise to find deer down there, and they seem to be using the dam to avoid the muddy marsh and pond with their small hooved feet. The dam in front of the camera has a pretty nice growth of jewelweed, which seems to be on the menu for this deer. Raccoons could use the new dam as a bridge across the creek. That wasn't going to work for this guy, who really did want to get across. The lush vegetation in the lower marsh was also tempting for this young buck with felt-covered antlers. Smaller animals like this muskrat are also captured by our cameras. They're much smaller than beavers and have a thin tail. We see them regularly in Saltworks Creek, sometimes swimming with vegetation. This marsh cam shot shows a muskrat swimming up into Saltworks Creek. Muskrats would seem to be good prey for foxes. Woodchucks are also regulars at the dam, usually transiting the dam coming towards the camera. At low tide, woodchucks also used the new dam as a bridge while it lasted. In January, the dam cam captured this otter, one of my all-time favorite animals. We occasionally see them in Saltworks Creek in the winter, but it's always a treat. In our area, otters are most active at night, which might explain why we don't get to see them too often. In June, our marsh cam captured this otter, eating a rather small fish. Otters need to swim really fast in order to catch fish underwater, and they have a body plan that's very different from beavers. In July, this otter family came up into the marsh for a brief survey. Whenever you see a family group of otters, they're always playful and seem to be having a great old time. About a half an hour later, this single otter straggler seemed to be following along their trail. In October, that marsh cam also captured this opossum, a very shy nocturnal marsupial. Here's a snapping turtle going down the dam from the pond to the creek. We do see them in Saltworks Creek in the summer. The marsh cam twice captured black snakes swimming across the creek, again in the summer. Probably the most distinctive wildlife enhancement created by the beavers is the wood ducks, some of which are shown here by the dam cam in March. Those males are probably the most beautiful ducks we have on the planet, and beaver ponds are an ideal wood duck habitat. Here's a wood duck pair captured by the marsh cam in March, and here's another pair captured at the remains of the new dam in April. Now you're seeing the pond cam capture of a couple males in breeding plumage in September. Wood ducks nest in tree cavities, and we clearly had successful nesting around our beaver pond as shown by this dam cam capture in May. Here's a mother wood duck watching another clutch of ducklings going up the dam and into the pond. Our marsh cam showed wood duck mothers with ducklings multiple times in the spring, foraging in the marsh. The ducklings were getting bigger during May, but each week there seemed to be fewer ducklings in these flocks, and I couldn't help but think about all those foxes. By June, ducklings were getting their adult plumage and looking like little ducks. By September, it wasn't always easy to tell the adults from the ducklings we had seen a few months before. The dam cam also showed mallards up in the pond occasionally, which was no surprise since we see them often in Saltworks Creek. At least one pair of mallards apparently nested somewhere around the pond. Great blue herons were captured in the pond by the dam cam and also once by the pond cam. Here, the marsh cam showed us a great blue heron catching a frog from the new dam in May. We see the smaller green herons feeding along Saltworks Creek shorelines during the summer, and here's one in our beaver pond as captured by the pond cam. The dam cam couldn't capture small birds, but here's a flock of grackles on the dam in November. Our dam cam did capture this barred owl at the dam in daylight. It's not clear if it found small prey on the dam, perhaps a mouse. Well, you've seen a lot of images that show our local beavers and what they've been up to. So what's the take-home lesson from all this? To me, it's that beavers provide real benefit to wildlife and water quality in Saltworks Creek. In particular, I'd say the images you've just seen make a clear case for wildlife enhancement. Many people don't realize how much Saltworks Creek headwaters have been filled in by Cabin Branch sediment over the past decades. On some days, the view south from the Safer Marina looks like what you see on the right. But getting up into that beaver pond, you realize how much sediment is being trapped by the pond, and that sediment is otherwise going to be filling up Saltworks Creek. That lush vegetation you see in the beaver pond is taking up nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients from the water, and those nutrients would otherwise be going down into Saltworks Creek and into Chesapeake. Impervious surfaces block rainfall from replenishing the groundwater that's a basic resource for local communities. But ponds like this beaver pond allow water to seep into the ground from the pond bottom, and that water goes down to replenish the groundwater aquifers. In 2013, a Severn Riverkeeper project created a series of step pools slowing down stormwater flow from the impervious surfaces near the Annapolis Mall. That was a big project involving re-engineering the stream bed and creating step pools with big rocks and trees. Here you're seeing recent photos of that steep upstream restored section of Cabin Branch, with the smaller ponds and good creekside vegetation resulting from that project. So that $1 million project gave us basically similar benefits to what we're seeing the beavers giving us downstream for free. So now to wrap things up here, I'd like to say that it's been a great experience for me to learn about our beavers in Saltworks Creek. As a result, I've become what's known as a beaver believer, and my take-home message from this whole story is this. First, we should try and ensure that beavers continue their activity in the Saltworks watershed. We need to show our neighbors that beaver benefits I've described, and we need to protect vulnerable trees along Saltworks Creek so people won't get upset and call in trappers to remove those beavers. And finally, beyond that, I'd say we should be looking for other suitable locations where beavers can provide similar Severn watershed benefits at little or no cost to residents.